A missile test that unfolded not over weeks of diplomatic warnings, but in mere minutes of calculated aggression. Minutes that sent millions of Japanese citizens scrambling for shelter. Minutes that forced South Korean pilots into the skies. Minutes that pushed the Korean peninsula closer to the edge than it has been in years. What Kim Jong Un did today crossed a line that Washington, Tokyo, and Seoul had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, America's closest allies in Asia did not hesitate. They responded with speed, precision, and overwhelming force. Japan issued what officials are calling a severe caution alert, language not used lightly by Tokyo's cautious diplomatic establishment. And South Korea, understanding the gravity of the moment, went to full military alert. This is the story of what happened in the skies over the Sea of Japan. This is the story of how two nations responded when provocation became reality. And this is the story of what comes next. For months now, there had been signals, not official statements from Pyongyang, not formal announcements through state media, just signals that Kim Jong Un was preparing something unprecedented. North Korea has been provocative, yes, but they have been predictable in their provocation. Their missile tests have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a choreography. Test, condemnation, sanctions, silence, and then another test. But what set off alarm bells in Tokyo and Seoul this week was that the rhythm went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor North Korean military activity know the indicators: the movement of mobile launch vehicles, the increased radio chatter between military installations, the evacuation of civilian personnel from test sites, the sudden darkness of surveillance screens. All of that went quiet, and whenever North Korea goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. American reconnaissance satellites had detected unusual activity at the Sohae satellite launching station weeks ago. Japanese maritime patrol aircraft noted increased naval movements in the East Sea. South Korean listening posts picked up encrypted communications that suggested something was being coordinated at the highest levels, but no one knew exactly what. Until this morning. Early Tuesday morning, U.S. Space Command detected what they described as a high-trajectory ballistic missile launch from the Pyongyang vicinity, including a flight path that had not been observed in over 18 months. This was not a short-range provocation designed for domestic propaganda. This was an intermediate-range ballistic missile, the kind of weapon that puts Japan's major cities within striking distance. These are the kinds of weapons that North Korea only launches when they are signaling something very specific: technical advancement, strategic deterrence, or imminent escalation. Defense analysts in Washington didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Kim Jong Un was changing North Korea's strategic posture. And when a nuclear-armed regime shifts posture without explanation, even by the smallest measure, every capital in the region pays attention. The missile flew for approximately 47 minutes. It reached an altitude of over 4,000 kilometers, higher than most communications satellites orbit, and it splashed down in the waters of Japan's exclusive economic zone. That's not an accident. That's a message. The warning issued by Japan's government tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after official, briefing after briefing, described North Korea's launch as dangerous, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, unacceptable in a way that demands immediate response. Prime Minister Kishida convened an emergency National Security Council meeting before most Japanese citizens had finished their morning commute. But strategic ambiguity only works if the target hesitates. Japan did not. South Korea did not. In fact, their response today was among the most coordinated and forceful we've seen since the height of tensions in 2017. Here's what we know. Within 12 minutes of detecting the North Korean launch, South Korea scrambled F-35A stealth fighters from Cheongju Air Base. These weren't routine patrol aircraft. These were fifth-generation strike fighters, systems that South Korea only deploys when they are preparing to demonstrate overwhelming air superiority. Japan simultaneously activated its Aegis-equipped destroyers in the Sea of Japan and placed its ground-based Patriot missile batteries on high alert. The message was clear. Any further provocation would be met with immediate defensive action. Tonight, South Korean Military Command confirmed that the Republic of Korea Air Force launched precision strike exercises within hours of North Korea's test, including simulated attacks on targets that mirror the profile of North Korean mobile missile launchers. They demonstrated capability before Pyongyang could claim invulnerability. They hit simulated command centers, they hit mock launch vehicles, they hit targets designed to replicate the infrastructure that supports North Korea's ballistic missile program. In other words, South Korea targeted the nervous system of North Korea's strategic strategic weapons capability, the guidance systems, the fuel depots, the communication links, the components that would make another launch operational. This is what made Japan's warning so urgent. North Korea's missile test wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of capability advancement that could fundamentally alter the regional balance if left unchecked. And South Korea, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't target North Korean territory. They didn't escalate beyond defensive demonstration. They hit the message, we see what you're building and we can destroy it. They hit the psychology, your weapons do not make you safe. Japan's response was equally calculated. Defense Minister Hamada announced the immediate enhancement of early warning radar coverage across northern Honshu. Coast Guard vessels were repositioned to monitor for any additional launches, and crucially, Japan activated its emergency broadcast system, sending alerts to millions of citizens in regions that fell within the missile's potential trajectory. And here's where the story becomes even more alarming. Intelligence officials now believe that North Korea's latest launch was designed to test the coordination between Tokyo and Seoul after months of improved bilateral relations. Kim Jong Un wanted to see whether Japan and South Korea would hesitate, bicker, or delay, but instead the opposite happened. Japan and South Korea didn't fracture. They unified with a response that was so rapid, so synchronized, that even Pyongyang noticed. You don't get North Korea's attention easily, but today the U.S. alliance system did. Defense analysts speaking with international media under anonymity described Kim Jong Un's latest test as threshold probing, a way to measure exactly how far he can push before triggering a military response. But Japan and South Korea proved today that they remain both vigilant and coordinated. Their military exercises were not only immediate, they were calibrated so precisely that South Korean missiles landed in the same waters as North Korea's test splashdown within 2 hours of the original launch. That timing matters because it shows something critical about alliance readiness. It shows that South Korea is not merely reactive. They are anticipatory. Japan's decision to issue a severe caution alert carries additional weight. This is diplomatic language that signals Tokyo's willingness to consider enhanced defensive measures, potentially including the acquisition of counterstrike capabilities that have been politically controversial in Japan for decades. When Japan uses this language, the region listens. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of the Allied response. South Korean naval forces carried out live fire drills in the Yellow Sea, forcing North Korean coastal defenses to track multiple simultaneous threats. Japanese Air Self-Defense Force jets conducted intercept training exercises over the Sea of Japan that had been accelerated from scheduled dates later this month. U.S. Forces Korea, operating from bases across the peninsula, reportedly enhanced surveillance flights along the DMZ using RC-135 reconnaissance aircraft. This wasn't just a military exercise. This wasn't just a show of force. This was integrated deterrence. This was alliance cohesion under pressure. And alliance cohesion is the one thing North Korea has struggled to fracture since Kim Jong Un began his accelerated weapons development program. For every missile North Korea has launched, the U.S., Japan, and South Korea have countered with something that deepens their defensive integration. More intelligence sharing, more joint exercises, more forward deployed assets. Kim Jong Un wanted to divide. Instead, he unified. Remember, North Korea thought the Biden administration would be distracted by Ukraine. They thought Japan's domestic political challenges would slow decision-making. They thought South Korea's new government would prioritize economic concerns over security. They thought the alliance was weakening. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. The United States reaffirmed its ironclad commitment to both allies within hours of the launch. Japan announced it will accelerate defense spending increases already planned for this fiscal year. South Korea declared it will expand joint military exercises with U.S. forces beyond current schedules. Every assumption Pyongyang made about Allied weakness has been proven wrong. Every calculation about division has backfired. What makes this moment so dangerous and so revealing is that North Korea's latest test happened at a time when Kim Jong Un is under extraordinary internal pressure. Military hardliners want continued weapons development regardless of international response. Economic pragmatists want sanctions relief and diplomatic engagement. The security services want regime stability above all else. And the general population wants food security that has been undermined by years of isolation. Kim Jong Un is balancing these demands while managing what analysts believe is the most severe economic crisis North Korea has faced since the 1990s famine. And when leaders in that position make sudden provocative moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. This missile test may look like aggression, but it reads like desperation. A leader seeking external confrontation to distract from internal fragility. Japan's severe caution warning, now distributed through diplomatic channels to every major capital, was designed to signal that Tokyo is not willing to accept gradual normalization of North Korean provocations. Prime Minister Kishida said plainly that North Korea's missile launch was inconsistent with UN Security Council resolutions and international peace. That is diplomatic language for this is unacceptable and we are prepared to act. You don't usually hear that tone from Japan's traditionally cautious foreign policy establishment unless something serious is at stake. The United States echoed these concerns. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan issued a statement within hours condemning the launch and reaffirming American commitment to the defense of Japan and South Korea. Secretary of State Blinken called his counterparts in both Tokyo and Seoul before the day was over. The message was unified. The alliance stands together. Meanwhile, South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol addressed military commanders in a somber, resolute speech tonight. He said, "We will not tolerate any provocation that threatens our people or our allies." He said, "Our military stands ready to respond to any scenario with overwhelming force." And he said, "The era of hoping North Korea will change through patience alone is over." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a government that understands just how high the stakes have become. President Yoon has staked his administration's credibility on strengthening the U.S.-South Korea alliance. Today's response demonstrated that commitment in action, not just words. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. North Korea's missile launch wasn't isolated, along with the ballistic missile test. North Korean artillery units also conducted live fire exercises along the DMZ. Submarine activity increased near the eastern coast in ways that suggest potential SLBM preparations. Cyber operations increased targeting South Korean financial infrastructure. All of this happened within the same 72-hour window. When North Korea moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. This wasn't a single provocation. This was a coordinated pressure campaign designed to test Allied responses across multiple domains simultaneously. Military analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Kim Jong Un is preparing a seventh nuclear test, using missile launches to establish a pattern of provocation before the ultimate demonstration. Another is that North Korea is attempting to force negotiations by raising tensions to levels that make diplomatic outreach seem urgent. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Kim Jong Un is attempting to establish a new normal of routine provocations that the international community gradually accepts. But today, Japan and South Korea took that card off the table. They didn't minimize. They didn't delay. They didn't treat this as routine. They responded as if the threat was real, because it is. What we're watching now is a test of alliance credibility. North Korea wants to see whether the U.S., Japan, and South Korea will remain unified under sustained pressure. South Korea wants to show that it will not be intimidated into concessions. Japan wants to prevent any normalization of threats to its territory, and the United States wants to prevent any miscalculation that could lead to actual conflict. Every actor is watching. Every response matters. Tonight, we've heard from defense officials in Washington who are now monitoring North Korean military installations for signs of additional launches. They say activity at the Sohae facility suggests preparations for potential follow-on tests. They say North Korean state media has begun preparing domestic audiences for additional demonstrations of strength. And they say Kim Jong Un's decision to launch now is likely part of a broader campaign intended to pressure the incoming political environment in multiple allied capitals. But Japan is not backing down. South Korea is not backing down. In fact, both nations are escalating their defensive preparations. Their response today, swift, coordinated, and unmistakable, sent a message to Pyongyang that provocation will not be met with hesitation, and it sent a message to Washington that the alliance remains the cornerstone of regional security. As the week goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Kim Jong Un hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Japan's severe caution warning was timely. It galvanized international attention. It demonstrated alliance coordination. And it reminded North Korea that provocation has consequences. What happens next will depend on what Pyongyang does in the next 48 hours. If they pause and assess, this moment will be remembered as a successful example of deterrence. If they escalate further, Japan and South Korea have already shown they are ready. They have shown they are prepared to respond. And tonight, for the first time in months, North Korea appears to be reassessing. Pyongyang is quiet, too quiet. And when North Korea is quiet after a provocation, it means they are calculating. It means they are choosing their next move carefully, because tonight, Kim Jong Un learned something he has learned before but keeps forgetting. The alliance is stronger than he assumed. The response is faster than he expected, and the resolve is deeper than he calculated. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Japan will not accept threats to its people as normal. South Korea will not allow provocations to go unanswered. And the alliance that has kept peace in the Pacific for 7 decades remains unbroken, and we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.